Pleasure to host you on Palisades Gold Radio today.
Thank you very much.
Excellent. Coming Friday, the reported 14-point MOU, Memorandum of Understanding, between Iran and the United States is getting signed, reportedly in Geneva, Switzerland. Now, Dirk, I'm very curious to hear, what is your assessment of this leaked 14-point MOU? Would this be a strategic defeat for the United States? Or alternatively, are we on the correct path to a durable peace in the Middle East?
Well, like Richard Nixon said many years ago, I'm glad you asked that question. Let's start at the beginning. First, I want to say something about the larger strategic picture, because yesterday evening I was invited to go into D.C. and a friend of mine said, will you come in and talk to some of my business partners? So I said, sure. So I went in. There were supposed to be 3 or 4 people there. There were 40 people. And I said, what are you doing? He said, well, these are all people that we do business with. And I said, well, why do you want me here? He said, well, I want you to talk about the strategic position that we should take. And I won't go into detail about their area of business, but it's an important one. And I said, okay, you ambushed me. I'll give you, the best shot I can for about 15, 20 minutes and then answer questions. I said, okay. So I started off by saying, first and foremost, energy, metals, minerals, fertilizer, and food are the businesses to be in now. Nothing else. That's where you put your money. Energy, metals, minerals, fertilizer, and food. And everybody's saying, wow, what about AI? I said, AI is a bubble. They said, what about SpaceX? SpaceX is a bubble. Let me say once again, you want to be in energy, metals, minerals, fertilizer, and food. And they said, well, what about this new agreement? Is this going to change everything? And is energy going to return to normal? I said, energy disruption always detonates financial markets. The war is not over. Whatever we sign on Friday, the war is not over. The structure of the world is not yet changed. It's changing, but it has not reset. Will it reset? Yes. So they said, well, then, what are you saying? We're confused. Has America lost this war? I said, yes. Iran has won the war. The United States has lost the war. Israel has not won the war. It has not yet completely lost the war, but it will. Well, then what do you mean by that? I said, well, I'm telling you that whatever we sign on Friday, shortly thereafter, the Israelis will resume the offensive. Iran will respond by attacking Israel. They said, oh, no. I said, oh, yes. They said, well, what will Washington do? I said, well, I can tell you what Washington will do. The pressure on President Trump to re-engage in support of Israel will be overwhelming. He will be pressured to re-engage. They said, will he re-engage? I said, yes, I think he will. He'll probably say, okay, we're going to go in here. We're going to try and help the Israelis. But then he's probably going to say, we can't stay in this. We cannot stay in this. And whenever he goes in and whatever he does with our armed forces, once it's been done, he's going to say, I've done all I can't do any more. And then he will begin disengaging. And everyone was in a state of shock. Said, so you mean the United States Armed Forces have lost? I said, yes, absolutely. This was inevitable. There's an old expression, a ship is a fool to fight a fort. You could have brought the entire United States Navy along with the naval power of all of our allied nations, and we still would have lost. The topography, the geography, all of it was against us. And the Iranians have mastered the real revolution in military affairs. That is, they've linked all the space-based and terrestrially based surveillance, intelligence, reconnaissance platforms to these thousands of ballistic missile platforms and cruise missiles and unmanned systems. and we can't possibly destroy them all, and they can reach all of us long before we reach them. And we engaged thinking that we could do all of this without ground forces. And then we decided, well, we may need ground forces. And we discovered something we've all known for a long time. We don't really have an army. We have a gesture, not the real thing. So everybody was very depressed at this and said, well, where do we go from here? Well, I said, short term, you've got to be prepared for the price of oil to go back up again. Remember, we had this the last couple of days, we've had this sort of drop in oil prices. And I said, that price is now going to go up because people are going to say, my God, the Strait of Hormuz is not really open yet. The Strait of Hormuz is still at risk. We all can't get the energy we need. And they're right. They're going to find that out. So it's going to go back up again. Will it ever come down? Well, it's going to take some time because, first of all, you're going to extract all the oil that you can, and you're going to put that oil into your strategic reserves. We will do that. The Japanese will do that. The Chinese will do that. Everybody will do that in the advanced world. And in the developing world, especially the global south, where there were no reserves, they're going to build reserves. So the demand for oil, the demand for liquid natural gas, the demand for all the energy that can be created is going to dramatically outstrip the supply. And as long as there is more demand than supply, the price of those things is going to go up. And somebody said, well, what else? I said, well, we talked about coal. The Indians, the Japanese, the Chinese are all going to run their plants on coal. If you're in coal, you're very smart and you want to deliver as much of it as you possibly can because the world needs it. And a lot of that coal will be liquefied. Some of it will be thrown straight into the furnace and burned to power plants, but a lot of it will be liquefied. I said, in addition to that, nuclear power is going to be on the agenda. And the states which have maintained their nuclear power stations are very fortunate. The French have done that. The Germans are very stupid. In their fit of green extremism, they destroyed everything.
Today's episode of Palisades Gold Radio is proudly brought to you by our parent company, Palisades Gold Corp, Canada's leading junior resource investment vehicle, trading on the Toronto Venture Exchange under ticker symbol PALI, with equity and warrant positions in over 200 companies, ownership of mineral projects and royalties, and a significant stake in newfound gold. Palisades offers investors powerful, leveraged exposure to precious metals, uranium, copper, and other critical minerals. Palisades shareholders directly benefit from our team's extensive industry knowledge and access to deal flow, opportunities historically reserved for a small group of investors. To learn more, visit us at palisades.ca and join us in our mission to level the playing field for investors. Now, back to the show.
And, what are you going to do? You're stuck. You have to go back to whatever you can find in the meantime. But in the meantime, what you have is all you're going to get because it takes time and capital to build refineries. It takes time and capital to drill. It takes time and capital to mine. These things are all going to be at a premium, which brings me back to my opening statement, which I think I'm going to start a song or something. Energy, metals, minerals, fertilizer, and food are the businesses to be in. Just repeat that over and over and over and over again, because people need to get it. They need to understand it. Everything else is a fugazi, as was mentioned in that movie Wolf of Wall Street. Everything else is fugazi, but energy, metals, minerals, fertilizer, and food, that's where you want to be. Now, the last thing, and this is very important, the world we live in today is changing, and structurally it's going to look very, very different in the future, because especially in the Middle East, the first thing that you're going to see is that all of the arrangements that we and our British and French allies reached in the Middle East after World War I, and then subsequently were reaffirmed only this time largely under American leadership after World War II, are all going to disintegrate. All the states that you see today on the Arabian Peninsula really are largely artificial. Before the First World War, yes, you had various Arab tribes that had areas of concentration and influence, but real modern states in the sense that we think of it didn't exist. These states can't protect themselves from determined enemy attack, wherever that comes from. We have now demonstrated conclusively that we cannot protect them. That means that they're going to have to search elsewhere for friends and allies that can help protect them. Now, who are those friends and allies? Well, believe it or not, they're going to have to come to terms with Iran, because Iran has demonstrated what it can do. Iran is on the road to becoming a great power. There's another great power in the neighborhood that is sitting on the sidelines. It's called Turkey. And the Turks have the largest military force. They also have substantial scientific industrial base, everything from nuclear power to steel production. They are in a position to engage. And what do I mean by engage? As it becomes clear that Iran has won, and as we Americans disengage from the region, which we will do, we will pack up and we will get out. We are not going to go back into the Persian Gulf, pour billions of dollars into new facilities and new bases that we cannot protect. It's not going to happen. So we're going to pull out. When we pull out, Iran rises as the leading Islamic power, and it becomes clear that Israel is now largely on its own, and it too cannot protect itself any longer. The Turks will engage. What are the Turks going to do? Well, they're going to crush the Kurds. That's a permanent thorn in their sides. They want to get rid of it. Guess who else wants to be done with the Kurds? Iran. So you will have initially an alliance of convenience between the Iranians and the Turks regarding, mutually shared threats. And that one threat that they would like to dispose of quickly is the Kurdish threat. And the Kurdish threat would not exist were it not for us, and more important, if it were not for Israel. Now, what happens to Israel? Well, my experience over there tells me, and I've been over there several times since 1999, that there are Israelis who are just as committed and determined to fight for their country as I am for mine or you would be for yours. But they're in the minority. And the majority of Israelis will say, that's it, we're leaving. Why would they leave? Because they will not live in an Israeli state that is assimilated into the region. In other words, they will not live under arrangements that they cannot dictate, that they cannot control, and that they cannot dominate. And if they can't dominate and control the region that they live in, thanks to us and our influence and military power, they'll go somewhere else. Now, where will that be? I have no idea. More than a few Israelis tell me, well, if it gets that bad and we can't overcome the Turks and the Iranians and everybody else, well, we'll go to New York City. Well, that seems to be off the agenda now, given the Muslim mayor of New York City. So where will they go? I suppose they could go to Miami. They can go to Argentina. There are other places they can go besides that. But my point is, the truth is out there, and the truth is telling us that long term, right now, as I see the forces developing across the region and around the world, there's no future for Israel in the Middle East. That doesn't mean they're all going to die. It means exactly what I said, that over time it will vanish. Now, what about the rest of the world? Well, the rest of the world has watched what has happened to us, Stein, and they've said, well, these Americans have turned out to be incapable of coping with this new revolution in military power. They can't protect us. That means if you're in Japan, we can't protect the Japanese. If you're in Korea, we can't protect the Koreans. If you want to start a war over Taiwan's independence, you can't protect Taiwan. So that means we're probably going to be invited to leave most places where we currently garrison. In other words, this American military hegemony, which has become global in the last 80 years, is going to go away. Now, we've already seen the outlines of this departure in Europe. It hasn't gone, full-fledged in the sense that we're currently pulling forces out of Europe. But I think the handwriting's on the wall. We can't protect Europe from the kind of military power that we've seen employed in Iran, and the Russians have plenty of it. The Russians are actually the original creators of this ISR strike capability. You've got to go back to the 1970s. You look at the work of Marshal Ogarkov and his brain trust, especially Mahmoud Gareev. These men put together everything that you've seen in Iran, only they envisioned something even more powerful and profound, and that was orbiting around the planet, which means that we're probably going to see either new treaties or agreements regarding what can happen in space, or if we're very stupid and we refuse to cooperate with these new treaties and new agreements, then we'll see enormous weapons platforms appear in space, which can target as instantly as anything you've seen in Iran, anything that comes within 1,000 miles of anybody's territory. In other words, what I'm trying to say is that we usually treat military power as something separate from everything else. But in reality, military power, economic prosperity, science, technology, all of these things are inextricably intertwined. We no longer have a monopoly on many of the things that we've enjoyed for the last 80 years. And these things are proliferating. And it's not just Iran. And the point is, you cannot do business in the future if you're an American the way you did in the past, which also suggests that we have to turn back to the economic sector. And that brings me back to where everything started. And I tried to explain to these gentlemen, and they're actually sort of on the periphery of this, but, energy, metals, minerals, fertilizer, and food are the stuff of everything. Everything. You can't operate as a civilization without those. If you can't secure those, if you can't develop those and expand those and cultivate those, you're going to go under. So I think what will ultimately happen long term is it will come home to the United States. We'll come back to the Western Hemisphere, and we will focus on exactly those things. And once we have regained much of our prosperity, I think we'll begin to look around at the rest of the world. But for the moment, I think we're going to be very focused at home. And that's a good thing, because we haven't focused there for a long time. And it's interesting that President Trump, who promised to do that, has violated his promise. And he's now put us in a very serious position. I don't know if you followed the accreditation that Fitch provides, but they published, a statement about the credit worthiness of the United States and its economy, and it was pretty grim. Their outlook is terrible. And I think we're now on this sort of decline financially and economically, but we're going to hit a point where the decline then becomes a sudden drop. And I think we're going to find ourselves into something akin to a depression. Now, how bad that'll get and how widespread and how serious, you've got other people that are better positioned to answer that question than I am. But these are the big trends. These are the big movements. And I think the Europeans, their governments haven't all figured it out, but I think the Europeans have figured it out. And if I were you as a Dutchman, I would find whoever wants to eliminate your agricultural sector and hang that person and get back to cultivating the kinds of crops that you have in the past, because it's going to be gold, pure, unadulterated gold.
With gold trading at new all-time highs, gold producers are printing money. And this means that for the first time in years, money is beginning to flow into exploration. This is a trend that we at Palisades Gold Corp have long anticipated, which is why we spent the last decade assembling the largest junior-held mineral claim package in the United States through our subsidiary Made in America Gold Corp. Made in America Gold Corp holds over 700 square kilometers of prospective ground, located exclusively within America's most prolific gold mining trend, the Battle Mountain Eureka Trend. Made in America's properties are nestled amongst several of Nevada's largest gold mines and resources, making it highly prospective for a potential discovery. To find out more, visit palisades.ca and join us on our mission to make Nevada's next multi-million ounce gold discovery. Now, back to the show. Incredibly dark future on the short term that you're describing here. Now, the pathway of this MOU falling through and return to war seems clear. It seems to be Israel's presence in Lebanon. I'm curious to hear, what is the pressure behind Trump for signing this 14-point leaked MOU. As perhaps you already mentioned earlier, the administration has been incredibly successful at suppressing oil prices, or at least talking them down and keeping them at low levels thus far. So where is Trump feeling the pressure from right now to sign this MOU that seems like an admittance of defeat?
Well, he knows three things. First of all, the Strategic Petroleum Reserve is being drawn down very quickly. Depending upon whom you want to talk to, whether it's Steve Hanke from Johns Hopkins or was it Grundlage in the bond market, or Ray Dalio, any of these people all tell you the same thing. We're drawing that down, and we're going to get to the point where we cannot draw it down any further by the fall. Now, that could come earlier. It could come at the beginning of August or end of August. So that's the first thing. He knows that. All of our refineries right now are operating at peak performance. We have not built a new refinery in over 25 years. So we can't refine any more than we've already got. People are bringing us their oil to refine. But pretty soon it's going to be very difficult for us to refine the oil and export it. And so we may see a situation where the president intervenes and bans any more exports because of the position we're in with the Strategic Petroleum Reserve. Those things have an impact. You disrupt the energy markets, the financial markets react. He's done a good job of talking people down from hysteria, and he's used the Strategic Petroleum Reserve, but he cannot conceal the fact that we were defeated militarily. Can't conceal that. He cannot conceal the drawdown in the Strategic Petroleum Reserve. Now, there are ways to work around the Strategic Petroleum Reserve. What are those ways? Well, you have these shadow fleets that move oil in and out of various places. And you have alternative ways to get it out of the Gulf. You have the pipeline across Saudi Arabia that I've driven up and down, that goes from east to west over to Yenbo and elsewhere to be tanked up and moved out. But all of that is very, very fragile. And you can only do so much with the alternatives to oil and gas at this point. You can't completely supplant them or replace them. We're not going to suffer as badly as perhaps other countries, but everybody is in a very similar position in that regard. And we've talked about the fertilizer problem, the absence of sulfuric acid, which means that you can't refine a lot of the minerals that you need to, the absence of nitrogen, you can't develop the fertilizer. All of these things continue to plague us. We're seeing record bankruptcies in the agricultural sector. He knows that. And finally, he knows that inflation has continued to climb. Wars breed inflation, which is one of the reasons he never wanted the war to begin with. Remember, after the first sort of 12 days, we had this B-2 demonstration of dropping bombs on various things, and President Trump said, "War's over. It's over. We've destroyed everything. It's over. Go home." What happened? Well, Israel wouldn't end the war. Israel insisted on continuing. So eventually, what's he do? He capitulates and is dragged back in to this very destructive, self-defeating war that Israel has begun. Then we go through this phony pause, phony ceasefire, whatever you want to call it, the on-again, off-again blockade. And now Israel wants to resume the war. Their view is until Iran is reduced to ruins and completely destroyed, there is no victory. And Israel can't survive not destroying Iran. Either Israel survives or Iran survives. But he's come back now and said, no, wait a minute. I didn't sign on for the chaos that you've created. I can't support unconditionally the mass murder of everyone in the region you don't like. I've covered your mass murder in Gaza. I've covered for your mass murder in Lebanon. I can't cover anymore. Now we'll see what happens. I think President Trump is in a confrontation with the Israel lobby. It's billionaire contributors inside the United States who put him in office. I think their demand is clear and unambiguous. They want him to go back and finish the job. That's what the argument is. You got to go back and finish the job. In other words, bomb everybody that's there into the Stone Age. He doesn't want to do it. It's not a question of emotional commitment to the people of Iran. That's all nonsense. He doesn't want to do it because it could destroy the global economy. He knows that now. He understands that. He did not understand it when it began. No one ever briefed him on the probability of the Strait of Hormuz being closed, of our probable inability to reopen it, and the terrible consequences for the world economy. I don't think that was ever made clear to him, but he understands that now. And he understands that that cannot continue. So what he will try to do is insulate the United States from what happens between Israel and Iran. He won't be able to do that completely. He'll be drawn back in some fashion, but he won't stick with it because he knows he can't. So that's why I'm suggesting that, oil prices are going to go back up. You're going to go back up over $100 for oil. I don't know if it'll go to 140, 150 or even higher. It all depends on how violent this next episode turns out to be. But the point is that structurally inside the United States, nothing has changed. He still is obligated to the people who put him in office. And that's the Jewish lobby, the Israeli lobby, and the billionaires. He can't simply ignore them. And if he does, who knows what could happen. Here in the United States, this is a revolutionary change. All you have to do is look at the polling data for the last 30, 40, 50 years. And you understand that Israel has enjoyed enormous support from us, popular and otherwise. That's almost completely gone now. And it's going to be very difficult to get that back. In fact, I don't think you are going to get it back. And then we have our own problems of all different types and kinds here inside the United States, and everybody wants to focus on those. So I think structurally, the United States is changing and is going to be very different in the future from what it's been in the past. I think they finally found a war that we could not easily win, and a war whose loss cannot be concealed.
I would also talk about the SPR, the Strategic Petroleum Reserves, for a bit longer. Of course, they are draining significantly faster now that oil is being talked down to around $75, $78 a barrel as we're speaking right now, compared to in a scenario where it would have been at $140, $150 a barrel, as there would at least be a little bit of demand destruction. Is that a strategic mistake by the Trump administration, as a petroleum reserve that's not really a reserve any longer as it's emptied is no longer strategic?
Yes, I agree with you. But I think the whole war is a strategic mistake because it's revealed that we are vulnerable. We are not invincible. We are not the almighty force on the planet Earth and never were. That's always the case. If you claim that you're the most powerful, that's the first indicator that you probably aren't. Britain went into World War I thinking that it was the most powerful state on the planet. Discovered pretty quickly it wasn't. We came in and rescued them from certain defeat at the hands of Germany and Austria. The point I'm trying to make is, had we not engaged in this war, very little in the world would have changed dramatically for many years. These changes that we're discussing, this movement of wealth and power in many respects from the west to the east, just as this began in 1492 with a movement of wealth and power from the east to the west. This was going to happen at some point. It was going to happen because of a lot of poor decisions that we made and our European friends have made regarding their economies and hollowing them out, exporting, manufacturing, and all this kind of thing. It was going to happen. But all of the bad things that were already in the mix have now been dramatically exaggerated. And the speed with which the changes are now going to occur has been greatly accelerated. In other words, everything is magnified out of all proportion to what it would have otherwise been. So I think we're going to see all these changes, strategic economic, military, all of these things are now going to sort of sweep across the planet. Can we adjust to it? Of course we can adjust to it. This is not the end of the world. It's going to be very inconvenient. It's going to change the way we see ourselves and the rest of the world. But it's not the death knell of the United States any more than what's been going on is the death knell of Europe. Things will change again. Europeans and we are going to come out of this fog that we've been wandering around in, and we will regain some sense of ourselves and focus on what we do best. And that's ultimately what every country needs. It needs a competitive advantage. And the Europeans and we will find our competitive advantage again. But in the meantime, it's going to be very painful. And I don't think Donald Trump recognized that by engaging in this war on behalf of Israel against Iran, that he would precipitate the kind of destruction and chaos that has ensued. But I think he knows it now. And so even when the Israelis attack and the Iranians respond, he's going to try and limit our involvement in any way that he can, because he doesn't want the strait to be closed again, even though temporarily that may turn out to be the case.
And talking about agriculture for a second, you mentioned earlier sulfuric acid, sulfur, that's currently trading at all-time highs, well above the previously set all-time highs. However, I was very surprised to find that urea, one of the big inputs for agriculture, is actually trading at pre-war levels, even though all the destructions. When we try to get a full sense of the agricultural complex, has a large part of the crisis that could have been averted?
Well, you see, this is something that people don't know at this point. They're hopeful that it has. But we haven't really experienced the first set of effects that came with the earlier closure of the Gulf. In other words, it takes time for these effects to be felt. Now, I have a lot of connections to India at this point, and my Indian colleagues tell me that the United States, which has usually been favorably viewed by India, is now very negatively viewed. But India was always very pro-Israeli, at least in part because of their opposition to their Muslim neighbors. But right now, Israel is regarded as practically a demonic influence in the world. They see it as responsible for this entire catastrophe. India was not prepared. So the situation in India is pretty dire when it comes to energy and agriculture and so forth. I'm sure that anybody who has any fertilizer anywhere in the world to sell could make a fortune if they can transport it to India right now. And I think that that's going to be the case in many places. So we haven't seen, the first wave. It's sort of like standing on the ocean. And you know what a tsunami is. And the first thing that happens is that the water moves out and the tsunami builds up and then starts to move in. I don't think the first tsunami has struck yet. So that's the best way I can put it. It will hit. The question is not, will that strike and will we survive it? Yes, we'll survive it. It's going to strike. It's going to make us all miserable. The question is, do we get another one? In other words, do we continue with this war? Once this initial agreement is signed and everybody celebrates and it breaks down, as it inevitably will, because the Israelis don't support it and don't want it, is there another tsunami coming too? Does that make sense? That's sort of the way I look at what's happening now. We're only beginning to feel the effects, and we're doing everything we can to mitigate those effects, as you would expect. But you can only do so much. And the question is, do we get another? I don't know. It's too soon to tell. I am hopeful that if President Trump relents and goes back in again in support of Israel against Iran, that it will be limited and short. Because if it's limited and short, we might be able to avoid an even worse catastrophe.
What would that even worse catastrophe be? Would it be a ground component to it?
Oh yeah, massive. Oh no ground force. No, there's nobody to send. The Israeli ground force is in disarray. In fact, inside Israel, the situation is very chaotic. You have the Israeli Defense Force on the ground cooperating with settlers on the West Bank to attack and drive out Christians and Muslims to destroy their villages. You have unchecked violence against people in Gaza, as always. You have a lot of violence inside Israel between Israelis who are fighting over what they think should or shouldn't happen. That is something that escapes everybody's view because we don't get a true picture through the mainstream media. But I think what we have to do is we're going to have to deal with the first effects. I think that many governments are working hard right now to prepare for those first effects. And remember, a lot of our strategic petroleum reserve was not used up within the United States. We sent a lot of that to Japan and other countries. Because remember, when we started this war, we did not consult with any of our friends or allies. So, we've done what we can to try and mitigate this, not only at home, but also globally. But right now, if you look at inflation, if you look at the markets, I don't think the Fed is in control anymore. And I don't think you can artificially suppress interest rates in perpetuity. And the bond yields continue to rise. So I stand by the prediction that, we're going to be hit by this tsunami. The question is exactly when and how bad. But then the more important question is it one tsunami or are we going to go through some more? And that depends on what Washington does and how much influence the Jewish state really has here in the United States. So I think it's pretty substantial. So I think, as I pointed out, we will re-engage. The question is how much and for how long.
In this worldview that you have, how are you thinking about gold? This economic tsunami that you're outlining, that sounds like a recipe for debasement. However, when the world becomes more unstable, there's also a good chance for gold, I suppose, to gain in relative value, not just nominal.
A good chance? You are the master of understatement. You sure you don't have any English ancestry? The British are always renowned for their understatement. Look, I remember when people said, oh, gold will never reach 4,000. Impossible. And then they've said, oh, it'll never reach 6,000. Listen, we're going to see it hit 10,000. My point is gold is going to become the currency once again of the realm. Now, is there an alternative to it? Yes, I think you're going to see something like Bitcoin that will be utilized as an alternative to the dollar for transactional reasons, as a way to create and sustain private credit. But ultimately, gold will be the coin of the realm. There's no question about it. So at this stage, I would say to anybody that's thinking about investing in it, there is no ceiling for your purposes. The long-term outlook is all positive and up. And these sort of temporary corrections and then restarts back up the ladder are going to continue. But where else do you go? There is no better alternative.
There is no better alternative. And of course, like you outlined, $10,000 gold, certainly in a world of debasement, is in scope. However, purchasing power of that gold is also very important. So how are you thinking about that? Do you think there's a good chance for the purchasing power of gold to actually increase over the next few years? Well,
look, I'm a lot of things, but I'm not a prophet. I think you're probably right, but that's why I bring up Bitcoin, as a transactional means of doing business, because it's very hard to move tons of gold tonnage from point to point. The Chinese, as you know, have set up vaults for that purpose in Riyadh and Hong Kong so that they can literally physically move the gold around from whatever country has purchased whatever they wanted in terms of petroleum or something else. Gold is effectively the reserve currency. That's clear. We still call the dollar the reserve currency, and it will, at least in the popular imagination, remain that for a while, simply because there are so many dollars out there. So much is denominated in dollars, and so much business still carries on in dollars. But ultimately, it's gold will become the reserve currency.
This has been incredibly interesting, as it always is. I would love for you to talk about your X and your Substack.
Oh, well, thank you for, reminding me of that. I've got a new piece coming out next week on Substack that I think will be of interest to everybody because I try to make some of these points and I go into somewhat greater detail about how the map of the Middle East and Europe and elsewhere will change. One of the funny things, Stein, is that I remember back in maybe it was the 80s or the 90s, talking to some European officers, and they said, well, NATO exists to ensure the peace of Europe. And I said, yes, that's right. And this means there will be no more changes to European borders. And I burst out laughing. And they couldn't understand. I was sitting in Vienna. It was at an OSCE or whatever, the Organization of Security and Cooperation in Europe, OSCE meeting. And I started laughing and I said, gentlemen, you are Europeans. How many times have borders changed in Europe over the last 500 years? And of course they said, yeah, it's changed a lot. Borders are going to change again. That's the nature of the beast. The question is, how do you manage it? And that it's going to start changing radically in the Middle East, and it will also change in Eastern Europe. So that's these are some of the things I'm going to talk about in the Substack. And, you can find me on X. It's very easy. I'm the only Macgregor out there at this point. And I try to put out bits and pieces of interest and utility to people. What I try to do is shorten some of the pieces that I write and pull out, sound bites that will be of interest to people and lead them to other articles. But the Substack is very important, and that's turned out to be one of the best decisions I ever made to go into it because the Substack audience likes to read. The X audience, not so much.
That is certainly true, and the success has been well-deserved. Colonel Douglas Macgregor, thank you so much for your time and insights today. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, Stein. I appreciate it very much.
This podcast is for general information purposes only and does not constitute investment advice, an offer, or solicitation to buy or sell any securities. The views expressed are those of the host and guest and do not necessarily reflect the views of the company or their affiliates. Guests on the show are not compensated for their appearance. Certain discussions may include forward-looking statements subject to known and unknown risks and uncertainties that could cause actual results to differ materially. Listeners should do their own research, consult a licensed financial advisor, and not base any investment decisions solely on the information discussed. For a full disclaimer, please visit our website, and for full disclosure and risk factors of any companies referenced, please see full available disclosure and risk factors on their SEDAR+ at www.sedarplus.ca.